All right, and so with that, we're going to move into our keynote for today. I'm very excited to invite someone who many of you are already familiar with, Center for Sustainable Businesses founding director and distinguished professor of practice, Tensie Whelan. After 15 years of leading the Rainforest Alliance, where she and her team worked with thousands of businesses around the globe to improve sustainable production and consumption, Tensie came to Stern in 2016 to found CSB, the organization that is hosting this practicum. And 7 years later, her leadership and vision has enabled CSB to become an influential and trusted source of research and insight. On a more personal note, having had the opportunity to work with Tensie now for a few years, I find that there's very few people that have the vision and the audacity that Tensie has for change in this space, but also the operational experience to actually get things done. And that's what we need more of in this space. And so I think you're all in for an exciting keynote. And with that, I'd like to welcome Tensie to the stage. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Samir. And you can see, he is such an inspiration. I'm so proud to have him as a Stern alum, along with many of you who are also wonderful Stern alums. So thank you for that. And thank you, Samir. I also just want to briefly thank the CSB team for the incredible hard work they've done to organize this event. So many thanks to all of you. I'm also really glad I was thinking about wearing that suit. Really glad I didn't. You're like, what is she doing here? All right. So we, I think, heard this morning from this terrific panel about how there are different market drivers. And in my conversations with PE firms, and particularly with their portfolio companies, who tend to be small to medium-sized companies, not a lot of sophistication around sustainability, not a lot of understanding about these drivers, to understand, in fact, that we have drivers around operational efficiencies related to circularity and innovation and new product opportunities. We have consumer demand. Even if you're B2B, those companies that you're selling to will care about this. We have the regulatory drivers, both from a risk disclosure side, but also from an upside. So a whole series of different opportunities to really drive better financial performance for the portfolio companies, yet they're not really in a position, many of them, to understand those drivers and to be able to invest in them. And they'll need their PE firms to help them run through that. So let me talk to you a little bit about, first of all, just sort of telling you a little bit about us, the Center for Sustainable Business, for those of you who don't know us. Our focus is on how do we unleash the business value of sustainability, the transformative potential of business, right? It's business that, in many cases, makes the world go round, to solve societal challenges at speed and scale. We work around education. Any of you need interns. We also have a jobs board, so I want to just support our great students here, some of you were students at Stern in the past, so do help us with finding great opportunities for our wonderful students. Our research, and you've heard a little bit about that. We'll spend a little time on that today. And then also a variety of other ways through executive education, research partnerships, et cetera, that we work with our partners. A couple of things I wanted to focus on in this talk with you today. One of the areas that I see with private equity is that in some cases it becomes very easy to default to an ESG reporting focus solely, as opposed to a strategic value creation focus, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about why that's a problem and why it'll drive costs, but it won't drive financial benefit for you or your portfolio companies. I want to share a little bit about what we're uncovering related to the return on sustainability investment that Randy mentioned earlier, to give you a sense of how that then is driving what we'll spend most of the time about, helping private equity unlock financial value through sustainability in portfolio companies. And I want to, we thanked at the very beginning our sponsors of this event, but I also just want to highlight in particular two partners. One is Invest Industrial, who's been helping us for many years really understand the drivers and concerns in private equity around sustainability. And also Arthur D. Little, who seconded to us the wonderful Julian Marchese, who is the one who really helped me build out some of the tools we're going to talk about. And again, our thanks to our sponsors, to our partners, our NGO partners, as we'd mentioned earlier. So to start with this reporting conundrum, right? We've got an enormous amount of reporting being required throughout the world, particularly out of the EU, increasingly here in the US. And I want to point out how we should be approaching that and how to be careful about it, right? So as we think about ESG, and this also ties to the backlash in this country, right, where we've got this anti-ESG backlash. Think about ESG, those three letters. The way ESG started was really as a system to measure sustainability. ESG does not incorporate profitability. It stands separate from profitability. Sustainability is actually about bringing together environmental, social, and profitability, right? People, planet, profit. So if we think about ESG as a system of measurement, not a strategy, right? We can start to redefine how we're talking about these things in the public sphere and also begin to tackle some of the criticisms that we see. Also, one of the challenges around ESG reporting metrics from SASB, from the EU, et cetera, from ISSB, are that they are process and output based. They are not performance and outcome or impact based. And I'll show you what I mean by that with some examples. But the reason why that's important is if you're trying to drive value creation in your portfolio company and you're focused on an output metric like, do you have a policy for X? Or how many people have you trained, right? None of that tells you what you're actually delivering in terms of actual impact, which also is not going to deliver financial value. So tick the box reporting does not drive value. And also ESG accounting metrics, this is another big problem, are not actually tied to the financial metrics, right? So if you look at the ESG reporting around greenhouse gases, right, you don't understand, there isn't a way to then say, okay, this is resulting in energy savings, this is of X, this is resulting in risk mitigation benefits of X, right? So these are the types of things that we have to start to unlock. And just to sort of illustrate this for you, right, as we think about these outcomes, impacts, et cetera, let's just say we're thinking about diversity and inclusion in our company. We have to determine what kind of impact it is that we want to have. So let's say in this case, a diverse and inclusive workforce that is more creative and productive. All right, so that's our outcome, that's our impact. How do we understand how we get there? Well, we start with what are our inputs? Let's say we need to hire somebody to manage this. Then what are our activities? We need to develop a policy. We need to design some training. Our outputs are we have a policy. We have 50 people trained. But again, just the fact that I have a DEI policy doesn't mean that I've actually moved the needle on anything, right? So then, what are my outcomes? Well, I have identified X percentage more black managers, 100% equitable pay, and then I'm going to track, because inclusion is a much more difficult thing to track. It's qualitative rather than quantitative. I'm going to be tracking this positive reporting over time. That's helpful, and the outcomes is probably where most of the time we are going to get stuck. But ultimately, we want to understand, did this in fact result in a broadly diverse and inclusive workforce? How have we defined that? What does diversity mean in our company, right? If we haven't defined it, we don't know if we're getting there. And how do we determine if in fact we're more creative and more productive now? How do we put that in place, right? So my point is, all of the reporting sticks you at outputs. And you can see why that's not terribly helpful, right? In terms of either moving the needle on the topic, whatever that topic is, or actually helping you to derive value like a more creative and productive workforce. So just to give you a little illustration of this, and we've worked on a report which we've given to SASB, and we'll be talking about them further, to ISSB, excuse me, sort of about how you can move some of these metrics into more outcome-oriented metrics. But I just wanted to show you the kind of thing so you understand. Like in SASB, apparel, accessories, and footwear reporting, management of chemicals, right? Discussion of processes. That's an activity. That's not even an output. So I'm discussing these processes. What does that mean, right, in terms of actual change? So how might we then look at how do we understand what our key toxic chemicals are and what are our targets and how are we going to get there, right? And then if we think about the financials of our chemicals, how do we track the reduced cost? How do we track, for example, the benefit of being able to now to sell a product to a company or a person that doesn't have chemicals in it? Why do we track our sales and marketing benefits? Or what about in the factories that are producing these toxic materials, reduction of insurance costs of people who are being affected by their exposure to toxic chemicals, right? So there's a whole series of things that you could start to look at when you start to bring the economics into these more robust metrics. But I couldn't give you any kind of financial analysis related to a discussion of processes, right? Environmental impacts in supply chain management, again, percentage of tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers in compliance with wastewater discharge permits. That's an output. That doesn't, again, tell me anything about improvements or actually what the quality of the water is. So I'm not going to, just sort of give you a sense of this. So then if we look here at labor conditions in the supply chain, you can see here, again, more output type activities. You could make it an outcome if you sort of really look at progress over time. But again, these metrics are insufficient for driving change and therefore insufficient for driving financial returns. And when we look at them, we also see, and by the way, I'm picking on SASB because I've done the research. I want to say that this isn't just SASB, this is all of the reporting metrics, right? This is just to illustrate to you kind of why you need to be not managing to ESG reporting metrics with your portfolio companies. So here are the material topics missing from apparel, right? Greenhouse gas emissions. Apparel is a huge contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. Animal welfare, right? Water and waste management, product design and life cycle management. The other thing I would say about SASB metrics, 90% of them are risk. There is so much upside opportunity. People do not get up in the morning excited about managing risk. I'm sorry. I know many of you, that's part of your jobs. You wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to create a new product, a new service, something exciting, right? I also need to manage my risk. That's important. But it's not necessarily the driver of investment in a portfolio company to help them access new opportunities. So here's just an example, right? There's nothing in any of the ESG reporting metrics that would enable an investor to understand what Nike has done with its Flyknit technology, right? That Flyknit technology, they had two goals, right? One was to come up with a higher performing shoe, a lighter shoe, and the other was to reduce waste. And this goes back to what Closed Loop was saying. The traditional way of sneaker production, you cut out the little pieces, you then sew them together in the upper. That creates a lot of waste, all that stamping out, right? Then time and effort to do this, if it's a robot. So they came up with this idea of this recycled polyester that you weave into the upper. It's 19% lighter, so it's a higher performing shoe. It's reduced waste by 80%. It's $1 billion plus business. It's been a category disruptor. If you look at all the sneaker companies, they're now all copying this. Again, my point is your ESG reporting metrics, were you to be managing to them, does not give you any of this kind of upside. No way to track it. Okay. A little bit on the return on sustainability investment to sort of give you a sense of the types of things that we're thinking about that went into some of the private equity work I'm going to talk about later. So what we found is that when you embed sustainability core to your business strategy, it can drive these 9 mediating factors that then result in better financial performance. And those include customer loyalty, sales and marketing benefits, employee relation benefits, innovation, better media coverage, operational efficiencies, improved stakeholder and supplier relations, supplier resiliency, risk management, et cetera. Any kind of good management can drive any one of these things, right? You don't have to be sustainable. It's not necessarily sustainability that drive innovation. But what we see is that for every single sustainability strategy we look at, for every single type of industry, the practices that you embrace under that strategy can drive 3 or 4 of these types of mediating factors at any point in time. So circularity, we heard about from Closed Loop, drives operational efficiency. You're buying less, and you're not paying to dispose of what's left over, right? It can drive innovation and growth. It can drive supplier resiliency because you're less dependent on global supply chains because you're bringing it all closer to home, right? Those are the types of things that we want to be thinking about in terms of our different sustainability strategies. from that sort of broad construct, we then think about, how do we then get to actually monetizing the financial benefits? And all of this is on our website, Return on Sustainability Investment website. You identify, as you all do with your portfolio companies, what are the material ESG issues and strategies for that particular industry? And then what are the practices that we're going to embrace under those strategies? And it is at the practice level that you can actually monetize it, right? It's hard to monetize like an improved waste management. What actually are you doing to improve waste management? And it's at that level, those specific practices, that you can then figure out what are the financial returns from those. So you define the benefits. Is it an operational efficiency benefit? Is it a risk mitigation benefit, et cetera? Quantify them, because in some cases yours are intangibles, right? So how do you put in place a quantification unit for an intangible and then monetize it? These are some of the companies we've been working with. We've been working with agriculture, apparel, automotive, it's not all A's, pharma, utilities, et cetera, with private equity firms, with banks, et cetera. And really unlocking the understanding of what these financial drivers are of better performance when you're using sustainability or implementing sustainability. Just going to give you one example, because again, this isn't the thrust of this talk. But if you look at automotive, right, what we found looking at those non-mediating factors, that while you can unlock financial benefit in many of them, there are three that really stand out. And for one company, we looked at a number of different companies. We found that it improved earnings by up to about 3.7% of revenue net after their costs associated with it, through operational efficiency, risk reduction, and innovation and growth as the three areas where we saw really significant benefit in automotive. So just to give you an example of how we think about this, the sustainable strategies, then what kind of practices do you use, and what might be the benefits? So strategy, improve waste management. One practice is to recycle paint and solvent. When you recycle paint and solvent, you no longer buy the virgin stuff, you no longer have the waste disposal costs, and in fact, they were selling some of it left over and making a little bit of revenue on it, right? But, and here's an important thing for all of you as PE firms too. Companies do not know these operational efficiencies because the CFO does not track avoided cost. Avoided cost is a significant financial benefit of sustainability, right? Whether it's energy savings through real estate, whether it's avoidance of lawsuits, whether it is operational efficiencies like not buying the virgin stuff and getting no waste disposal cost. So really important to rethink some of our accounting, to take into, to understand what actually are our returns from our sustainability investments. So just to give you an example in automotive, for one company, their net impact on EBIT at the end of each year was about $235 million as a result of cost savings due to lower spend on virgin materials, increased net revenues, reduction in water costs, energy savings, et cetera, which they did not know because they don't track it, right? And again, this is every single company we've talked to. Do not track these things, right? They do not track the financial returns. This is also, a circular example, really fascinating. So in the EU, you're responsible as an automotive manufacturer for the end-of-life disposal of the car. So this particular company in Europe was reusing 2.5% of the product out of the car and selling 10% recyclers and paying to dispose of everything left over. That gave them a net, which they did not know, a net EBIT savings of $100 million because of both the recycling sales and the used product going back into the car. Renault in Europe, which is not this company, is now reusing, like I think it's 40% of all new cars have reused components in them. So if this company at 2.5% was netting $100 million, what is Renault netting? Well, I'll tell you, Renault has built an entire new company to be able to do this work. So you got to think that they're making money on it, right? And then just to give you a couple other quick examples of the types of things we've been looking at in food and beverage, but again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can see everything from working with Anheuser-Busch on nutrient management practices by barley growers, these regenerative ag practices are actually driving operational efficiencies, right? Also helping them with brand value and reducing risk. We see in Applegate that they've come up with a sustainable beef category, also consumer labeling benefits. Hero, jam company, looking at pollinators, right? Lose their pollinators, they don't have the jam. Creating an opportunity to both protect the pollinators working with farmers, but then be able to benefit from that from it within the marketplace. Cocoa, Natra, formerly an Invest Industrial company, responsible sourcing, recognizing the need to actually redesign their sourcing to deal with all the demand from the market as well as the risk associated with non-responsible sourcing. And then, food waste. Again, looking at this from a circularity or a waste efficiency perspective, this sort of investment improves yields for growers, lowers risks, and improves benefits for the company, for ingredient. So all of this is to say that there is so much submerged value related to sustainability that companies are not understanding, identifying, or tracking. And focusing on ESG reporting metrics will not get you there. Okay, turning to private equity. So first of all, I want to thank Julian Marchese, who, as I mentioned before, Uma Chander Balakumar, who also helped on the first phase of the research, and Jesse Weiss, one of our wonderful MBA students, for all their help. And again, thank you to Florent, who you'll hear from later, from Arthur D. Little, ClimateWorks, Foundation Invest Industrial, for funding this research. So the first phase, working with Chander, we looked at we developed a 135-page, I'm expecting all of you to read it, I'm going to send you a test, report looking at both private equity and the portfolio companies in terms of what constitutes actually responsible investing. And what's the pathway there? What are the good examples out there? What are the challenging examples out there? And in doing that work, we got very intrigued with some of the weaknesses in the sector, and then went out and began to work on a second phase of research that really focused on what we learned from that first discussion, but then also we did interviews with 30-plus GPs and LPs, as well as our NGO partners that we talked about earlier, to understand kind of where the industry was around incorporating sustainability into their work with their portfolio companies. And so what we found overall on the GP front, and again, I'm giving this in broad strokes, there are always exceptions, but looking at this across the investment cycle, on the due diligence side, basically GPs look for ESG red flags, and that's kind of it. So if there's a major red flag, they'll have a discussion. They may or may not go ahead with it. That's kind of it. Then moving to the 100-day holding period, the life of the investment, they may hire a management consulting firm to do a materiality matrix, identify a couple of ESG reporting metrics to be able to present to their LPs, and kind of call it a day, right? Again, I am, of course, leaving out some of the great work that many of you in the room are doing with your portfolio companies, but at a high level, that's what we hear pretty consistently. On the LP side, and finally, the other thing I would say is that on the GP side, that the companies we talked to really believed that there is a value creation opportunity here, but we're unsure how to unlock it, right? And so that's where, kind of for us, the interesting insights were. On the LP side, what we heard from LPs was they're generating these 500-question questionnaires. These 500-question questionnaires go out to the GPs. The GPs, unfortunately, sorry guys, often have many of these to fill out. They're all slightly different, so you can't just do one exactly the same for everybody. And by the way, after you've done all that work, you never hear back from the GP. There isn't a discussion about all those 500 questions. And then, the LP may ask you for ESG reporting metrics on your portfolio companies or your fund level. And if they do, you dutifully send them in, and then you don't hear back from the LP. And the LP doesn't really look at it, but may put in a couple of those metrics in its annual report at the year end saying this is what our funds have done. Again, cruelly overstating the challenge here. There is a lot of more sophisticated, interesting work happening. But on that last from the LP, I heard the same from the GP and the LP. They both had the same perception that this was more of a tick-the-box exercise than it was a real value creation focus, right? So where to go from there? So focusing on the GP side, again, we looked through very carefully the different kind of steps in the investment process to identify where we thought we could work with, and we have worked with a group of terrific GPs who have been giving us advice throughout to identify how might we help with this challenge around the due diligence phase to make that a little more sophisticated, but recognizing that it is going to happen in a very short period of time without a lot of information. And then for the holding period, how do we help GPs really understand and identify what those value creation opportunities are? And then how do they track them and report on them at exit? Because that's another challenge, right? We keep hearing from GPs, sorry, I should have mentioned this one. Again, we know there's a valuation multiple opportunity here, but challenging for us to determine what that is or how to assess it or how to communicate that. We looked at a variety of different ways to think about creating a value creation tool for GPs. We looked at discounted cash flow models, sensitivity tools, multiple tools, et cetera. And we found that there were actually some tools out there, but companies weren't using them. Like there's a climate DCF tool. It's quite interesting. But what we heard from GPs is, yeah, but we're going to do our own thing. So okay, you're going to do your own thing, so we need to think about something else instead of these types of approaches. So what we came up with is a tool that will help you identify kind of the strategic levers for value creation, both in the due diligence process in a more limited way, and then in a more extensive way in phase 2. So the way this works, and all of this is on our website. I'll give you a QR code at the end of this for you to be able to look at, and we'll, I'm also going to tell you some other things about that. I'll talk about that later. So first thing, of course, in your due diligence, this is now in your due diligence phase, the tools, Excel tool that gives you a drop-down menu of, after I've just given them a hard time, SASB metrics by industry. But what it has is not the metrics so much as the issues, right? Because SASB has done, even if it's not perfect, they've done a multi-stakeholder engagement around what are the material issues. So it's a place to start. And many of you are using their metrics. So you drop down, you put in your sector, you get your SASB material issues. But then we auto-populate it with what are the strategies associated with those issues, what are the potential practices you could put in place associated with those strategies, and what are the value drivers associated with that. So that you can look across this, not just by an ESG reporting metric, but what are the real strategic and value driver considerations for you. So I'll give you an example here of energy. Then the work that the company has to do, or their consultants, or whoever's doing it for them, is to look at the current performance of the company. Again, not against ESG reporting metrics, but against these points, like what are their strategies? What are their practices? Have they been unlocking any of these value drivers, right? And again, short and sweet, because this is in the due diligence phase. The companies that have been testing this for us say, it takes anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, basically, in this phase. And then we give you a way to score across 6 categories. The current progress of the company, do they have clear targets? Is there an innovation and growth opportunity? Is there a risk mitigation issue? Are they using credible reporting standards? And what are the management board organization capabilities? That's the last 2 for a small, medium-sized portfolio company. Probably not there, but just important to know. So this is just a little picture of, you can see how there's a drop-down menu with the different issues, then it auto-populates, and then we have you do the scoring, right? And we give you guidance on the scoring. So we'll tell you kind of how you think about it in terms of what the weights are, and then we will give you a heat map that comes from this. Here we give you scoring criteria for each of the questions, right? On current progress, as I mentioned, how is the firm currently performing? right? Where is its, do they have clear targets? What are they doing around innovation, et cetera? So you can, again, current performance from the company. And then you get a heat map from your entering in those scores. What's important to note here in this heat map, again, this is your due diligence phase, is that just because there's red there doesn't mean necessarily that you walk away, right? Because you could look at the value drivers and you could say, well, waste and hazardous materials management, while this company is doing absolutely nothing on it and it's a real risk for them, if we bought this company, invested in that, that could turn into a real value creation opportunity. I mean, maybe not, but the point here is to show you how might you think about this in a more value driver kind of way, or at the green, right? So if we look up at the top, advocating sustainable packaging solutions. So this company is actually doing quite well on that. And this is a company in the CPG space. This is just a company that we put in here for the model. Maybe this company is undervalued in terms of the opportunities that could be created out of tackling and really investing in their sustainable packaging efforts, right? So there would be an opportunity to grow that value. So that's the due diligence phase. You're now going to decide to move ahead or not. Then we go into the second phase. You've moved ahead with making an investment in the company. So now we want to look at future performance of the company as opposed to where it is currently, right? So here, we're giving you an additional set of scoring. Again, you've got this, if you went back here, right, you've got these, those were the SASB topics that were associated with that particular company. As you've gone through this, you may decide, and you have the opportunity just in the tool, to reduce some of those. But the second phase is now to help you really hone in on a couple of strategies where you want to make investments. That's the goal of the second phase. So we want to help you with prioritizing those particular issues and strategies. We give you a set of questions here to fill out, looking at the downside associated with the issue, market risk, regulatory risk, physical risk, geopolitical risk, and then the upsides, revenue growth, operational efficiencies, reputation, multiples, et cetera. And then in a final step, we give you the opportunity to look at the investment and efforts required for successful execution so that you can figure out where the low-hanging fruit is, where something is going to require more capital over a longer period of time. After we've done that with you, and you've determined what are your 3 to 5 most important strategies and priorities that you want to focus on, then we actually give you access to a database where you can determine and identify sustainability KPIs versus reporting metrics that will actually drive performance, and also associated ROSI, return on sustainability investment metrics, so you can track the financial returns every quarter, right, as you're tracking the performance of the company, so you know where you can invest more, where you should be investing more. But also, so at the end of your holding, when you sell the company, you've got the sustainable value story, the creation story with real numbers, both on the impact side and on the financial side to share. So that's the kind of overview. I'll just walk through kind of the slides behind it. So this just gives you a sense of, you fill it out for product design and lifecycle management. The particular strategy in this case is adopting sustainable packaging solutions. And then we look at, you fill out kind of what are the market risks that we need to assess, what are the business upsides that we need to assess, again, briefly there. And then we give you, we also give you, again, a guide to some of the questions to think through in terms of what do you give high scores for, low scores for in these different areas. And there's a more there's additional scoring guidance that we provide you that I'm not going to go through here. But this gives you, again, more insight into what you should be looking at for these different categories as you rate the company. So you'll end up with, for example, this is a particular example around water security for the CPG company. And here we've gone through and given them scores related to their various risks and their growth potentials, et cetera, related to water, because for CPG, both in terms of the packaging and in terms of the agricultural products, water is a huge issue, right? So then you end up with another heat map. But at this point, we don't think a heat map's all that helpful, right, in terms of focusing on strategy. So we then design, we take that heat map, which you'll get it, but we then take it and take the data and put it into a scatter plot that will help you prioritize the strategies based on high side, high downside, high upside, which is probably where you want to look first, low downside, high upside, and high downside, low upside. Probably not all that concerned about the lower left-hand quadrant. So again, with the company we were looking at, you can see for this company, in the right-hand side, that both has an upside and a downside, improving water scarcity, or security, excuse me, ensuring safe products and services, and then a little bit lower, adopting sustainable packaging. So it starts to give you a sense of kind of where these opportunities are to help you prioritize. And then if you want to prioritize further, as I mentioned, we also give you a mechanism for assessing level of effort and investment. So here we give you a guidance on high scores, what you use to score high or low around your different strategies and the investment effort required for successful execution. So you fill that in, and then you get a scatter plot that merges that other scatter plot, right, with the financial effort. So now what you've got is something that tells you, okay, on the left-hand side, that's where the upside and downside opportunities are, and underneath, this is where your investment and effort, so to the right, less effort, to the left, more effort. So you can see here, improving water security and adopting sustainable packaging solutions rise to the top for you. Now again, you may decide that you're more interested for whatever reason in managing climate change impacts, but this gives you a way to kind of assess and understand where the opportunities might be for your portfolio companies in a strategic way. Then, after this, you pick, let's say you picked 2 or 3 of these. What happens now is the ones that you pick auto-populate a set of associated practices. So this is not comprehensive, but it's a good list, right, of the types of practices that might be associated with, let's say, adopting sustainable packaging solutions, we heard about earlier, reducing packaging weight, substituting bio-based packaging, sourcing paper packaging from certified forests, reducing the packaging, and ensuring the circularity of the packaging, 100% recycled material, right? These are all different practices that you can put in place associated with that. Then we give you, based on the practices that you choose, ideas of how you design a KPI, a key performance indicator versus a key process indicator that will tell you how you're doing against this, right? So, let's say what type of bio-based material is replacing conventional packaging by X date. And what kind of benefits might you get out of that? And then we also give you a way to understand what the financial benefits associated with ROSI are and how to design KPIs to track financial returns associated with that, okay? We can't possibly, in this tool, give you every single sustainability KPI or ROSI metric that you might need. The goal is here to give you enough to be able to assist you with designing that with your own portfolio companies. We also have a broader database that we will be publishing on ROSI metrics for our ROSI work. That'll be a tool that will have even more metrics in it than what you'll get in this particular one. So that's on the GP side. I'm getting near the end here. I'm going to just turn over to LP and then open up to questions. So on the LP side, just to remind you, we have these big questionnaires. We have the ESG reporting data. We don't have a lot of interaction or accountability or forward motion in terms of performance-oriented activities associated with that, again, with exceptions. So how do we tackle that? And this sort of goes through, again, the investment life cycles. We looked at it with the LPs and how they're defining their own strategy, what they have to do that, their assessments of the GPs, how it worked, et cetera. But I basically laid out the 2 areas that we're focusing on. So first thing on the questionnaire, since we know that companies are going to use these ILPA questionnaires, and it's really important to have something that's consistent, and we did not sort of decide to get rid of that. What we did instead was pull out the 80 or so questions from the ILPA/PRI questionnaire that have responsible investing related topics, and then added the ESG data convergence metrics to that, because P's coming together around that. Those aren't, some of them are in the ILPA questionnaire, but not all of them, and brought those into the questionnaire. for this 90. So you've already filled it out. It'll populate from your current 500 questionnaire into this 90 questions. But then here's the big problem is like even with 90 questions, how do you manage that information? How do you determine what's useful and what's like the performance of the GP? So we took our impact categories that we designed in our first big analysis that I mentioned earlier, looking at the different components of a PE firm's approach to sustainability and ESG, looking at their investment policies, their management of their human capital, their fund management, their focus on sustainability strategy and innovation, and their societal impact. And then with those categories, we're able to then I put the different 90 questions into the appropriate category, so then you could create, in fact, a heat map or / scorecard where you score how they're performing against those different areas. And then we also look at anything that might constitute a critical nonconformity, something where there's a significant weakness, where if the LP moves ahead with the GP, they should be holding that GP accountable during the life of their fund holding. So, and I'll talk about the ongoing monitoring in a minute. But so here you see for a heat map, right, of a company, we analyzed their performance, the GP, based on those 90 questions. We can see that they're in the red around sustainable and responsible investment policies and around management of human capital, doing pretty better on some of the other ones. So we want to go in and look particularly at kind of where the challenges were around their investment policies, for example, and we may want to ask them to make some changes there related to their sustainable and responsible investing policies. Now moving to the ongoing monitoring of the tool. Here we look at how LPs can work with their GPs to actually have metrics that are performance-based, as we talked about earlier. So we include the EDCI metrics. We include the metrics that we built out with additional kind of performance orientation, and we give them, we've identified, I think it's about 20 different metrics, most of which can be applied across all types of funds. Few of them are industry specific, but with very specific KPIs that they can then report on as opposed to the broader ESG reporting metrics. So that is a bit about what we've been doing. Next steps here, we've designed an open source executive asynchronous course for GPs and portfolio companies, because again, what we found is that many of the portfolio companies don't have the skills to actually understand how to embed sustainability core to their business strategy. So this asynchronous course will provide that to them free. The GP and LP tools will be open source and on our website. And I want to state here a really exciting offer by BSR, the management consulting firm focused on sustainability. They are going to offer to work with up to 5 GPs pro bono to test and use this GP tool over the next 6 months. The goal there is to learn from your testing it with them to see how we can improve it. We've already had a number of companies working on testing it for us, but we want to take it further. And then also write up some cases based on that work with BSR on what you actually found in terms of the investments you made. We'd also like to work with LPs to test the tool, welcome volunteers. We'll be presenting it at PEI, publishing in Impact Alpha, doing a lot of outreach work. And so feel free to reach out to me to talk to any about that. This is the BSR commitment of support. And if I could just see if our BSR colleagues could stand up so people can find you. Yes? Great. Yay, thank you. So please do look for them, and we can also we'll also follow up with you after the conference in case your ship's passing in the night. And then here, I just want to put this up. So this gives you a link to the private equity webpage that has all these tools on it. So let me thank you, by the way, and let me open up to questions. Yep, any questions? Yes. So, yeah, so the tool itself, you would go in and build out, like if you're looking at an MPV, MPV over a couple of years, you'd be looking at, is there inflation associated with potentially increased pricing for a particular sustainable product, et cetera. But you'd be building that in there. So you'd be determining which, the model gives you the way to assess where these benefits might be and intangibles and tangible might be. In some cases, we built out actual monetization tools. In some cases, you'd be deciding yourself how you're going to monetize it. Yes, and hi, Heidi.
I was just thinking about integration of this into an existing platform that a GP might use. Probably not a new question, but going beyond reporting, you can develop, action plans, strategic objectives, and performance monitoring. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so one of the outputs from the GP tool is a document that summarizes everything that you did that you can use for investment committee reports or for planning with your companies. But we have not developed something beyond that in terms of how you might talk about this publicly. So it could be an interesting opportunity to explore more. In terms of building it into your own existing platforms, this is open source. So if companies want to take it and extract some pieces of it that work for them and put it into their own operating system, we are thrilled to have them do that. We'd love to get a little credit for it, but happy to have you use it however it's going to be useful. Because my goal here, CSB's goal, as an academic institution, is to shift, is to help private equity be the force for amazing change that it can be. So we want you to have these tools and use them as much as possible. Yes?
Comment a little bit about who in the firm is doing this work. Like, what kind of team needs to be structured? How do you integrate it more into the correct line of business? I just, from an adoption standpoint internally, I know Aaron mentioned this in the panel, like the skill set, the expertise required. What does that transition look like?
So we are going to have next a panel with GPs who've been working on this, and Florent will be Nance from ADL will be moderating that. So if you can make sure that we touch on that point, because I know we were already thinking about that. So we will make sure to touch on that. Yes, thank you. And then sorry, what's my timing here? No, sorry. I'm supposed to be done at 11, right? Yes. Okay. So one more question. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, where do you get the data from to kind of drive all this, right? Because you look at the individual target, but investors love to look and compare comp analysis. So where is that data from?
So we've been talking about the challenge around not having good comp analysis in private markets. So there isn't good data to look at competitive analysis right now. That's why when we have sort of gone into what the specific strategies and practices are for the company itself in its current performance, so in due diligence, all that matters really is where it currently is, because we're giving you insight into where those strategies, practices, and value drivers are. Less important unless you're looking at you're looking at two different purchases, but then you can also compare their performance, current performance. The piece where I think that's going to be really important is when you're making your decisions about investment, when you're holding the company. And we've been talking with Invest Industrial, like how there might be ways to sort of work with partners to begin to bring in some of the data that's being collected by companies like Nevada or by the ESG Data Convergence Project. Over time, if we get access to that data and apply some of these learnings to it, then we might be able to actually give you some competitive set information. Right now, it's not available. And trying to go to public markets for it, again, public markets, all of this data on public markets is this ESG reporting data that is not performance oriented. So that's also a big problem. We have time for our break now. I will be around, so happy to answer any questions. And when we come back, as you'll see here, we'll have more discussion around the GP tool. And these are some of the other areas we'll be working on. Turning back over to you, Samir. Yes, thank you.